Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Child Welfare series. In today's series, we're going to be discussing reunification and its importance. And I have with me Amanda, who is the program manager for 1 Million Homes. I apologize if my voice sounds a bit off today. I have a bit of cold, which is making my voice scratchy. So please bear with me. So when we talk of reunification, it's simply the return of children who have been placed in orphanages back into their families. And the reason why this reunification is important is that once it's done earlier, it solves all of the issues that, children go through when they turn 18 and are kicked out of orphanages. So, for instance, ideally, orphanages were designed to be a temporary place. So if a child is taken to the orphanage, it's believed that within 6 months to 1 year, whatever issue that took the child to the orphanage, it's solved. And so the child reunites back into the family. Fight, Luke, I see you. Don't worry, we'll fight backstage. So ideally, it's believed that once a child is taken there, within a space of 1 year, the child reunites back. But today, that's not the case. A child is taken to the orphanage, and then these children end up spending almost all of their years there until they turn 18. And when they turn 18, there's family dysfunctionality. It becomes difficult to reunite with their families because that bond is broken. And once that bond is broken, no matter how much you try to fix it, it's not fixable. And most of these kids or children find it difficult reuniting, and even some of the families don't want them back. And at that age, 18 years, they are adults, so obviously adopting them is not an option. So Amanda and I will be discussing all the nitty-gritties that is connected with, reunification, and why it's important that as a society we need to start paying attention to it. So let me try and connect Amanda, and then we can have the discussion today. Just enjoy my hill song whilst I connect Amanda. So I'm trying to get Amanda on, and then we'll start the discussion today. Thank you so much. So I'm still trying to connect our guests. Just please bear with me whilst I do that. It's kind of getting difficult bringing her on, but just a sec. Great. So I'm getting Amanda soon. All right.
Finally. I am so
That,
sorry.
that's okay. That's okay. It's good to have you here.
Yes, I'm so glad I could
Yeah,
figure that out.
I know it happens. It happens. So no
Well,
worries
first
about
time for
that.
everything.
Yeah. How are you
So, yeah.
doing?
Great now. I was a little bit stressed there
I
for a
know.
minute,
I know.
but it's
All
so great
right.
to see you.
What did you say?
It's so great to see you
Sure.
again.
Same here. Great to see you too.
I'm really excited for today's talk.
Sure. I am. So just not to waste a lot of time. Can you tell us who you are, what 1 Million Home does, and what you do with them? Yeah, and then we can
Absolutely.
start.
So my name is Amanda Good. I work with 1 Million Home right now. I've been in the sector of child and family welfare for, let's see, about 11 years now. So I actually lived in Rwanda for about 8.5 years in East Africa, was working with street connected boys. So we were just supporting kids to leave the streets, return back to family. Um, I think just the heart of reunification is just, I learned everything in Rwanda. Just the children, the families, they changed so much about who I am and just how I see the world, and really fell in love with seeing children return back to family after just being separated for so many years. And I now have the privilege of being with 1 Million Home, we're a global organization now, so not just focused in one country, but very widespread. I would say we started with the belief that just every child belongs in a family. We saw that in a lot of these institutional settings, whether it's a children's home or an orphanage, a lot of those children, they actually weren't orphans. And so we were kind of looking like, wait, there isn't an orphan crisis, there's actually an orphanage crisis. Like, we are having children institutionalized and separated from their family when they really shouldn't be. So 1 Million Home was a movement that started a few years ago to see 1 million children get back to family. We really started just seeing this become feasible on the ground in Kenya. So a lot of this, our methodology and approach to working with organizations and seeing children go home, it really did originate in Kenya. And I would say that we've seen a lot of children that have gone from extremely difficult situations on the streets, being unhoused, and to see them able to transition back home, in addition to like children with severe disabilities. So I think seeing children go back home, even in really hard circumstances, and knowing that it's possible. And so right now, 1 Million Home, we have a sister company in Kenya. It's called Weza Care Solutions. They are actually working very closely with the government in Kenya to see the end of institutionalized care. So the Kenyan government really saw this in the same way I think that 1 Million Home did, and said, hey, we want to be a part of this movement to get children home. So specific to them, they're doing it over 10 years. So by 2032, they're really hoping to see more organizations move children to families and doing family and community-based care. So it's really encouraging for me to see the movement happening, and to be a part of it. And I think like I learned so much in Rwanda just from like seeing children transition home and organizational change, and to see that it's going to happen like in multiple countries over the next few years. It's just really, really exciting for me personally.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I don't know, but so it means that in all the African countries, is it only Rwanda that does not have orphanages? Or
Yeah, I mean, as far as I can tell right now, Rwanda's the only one where you're not allowed to start an orphanage, you're not allowed to start residential care. Um, and I actually had the privilege of meeting the person who kind of started even that conversation in Rwanda about 3 weeks ago. And he was like, when I said this, like years and years ago, people thought I was nuts, like insane. They're like, that's never gonna work. Like, we need this. So for him to say that years ago, and to kind of see like wave after wave of care reform that's taken place in Rwanda, and just the different systems that they've been able to build out in the communities that help just prevent unnecessary separation. And I think that's the hope I have, is that there are so many countries that are kind of leading the way. And I see the same happening in Kenya, just like providing a lighthouse that the rest of these countries can kind of look upon and say, it is possible, like we can get children home, and it's really hard. It's complex, and we need to learn a whole lot before we do that, but it
Yeah.
is possible.
Yeah.
So I think 1 Million Home is really passionate about getting both leaders and organizations the tools and skills and resources that they need to make that change happen, because it is hard. As an organization, you cannot go from providing residential care
Mm.
to working with families. Like, there's a huge gap in what you need to know. So I think we're along for the journey, and a lot of us have spent a number of years with organizations and failed over and over again. So
Yeah.
we're in the business of hoping that people fail less than we did.
Mhm.
So very excited to like just connect with organizations in the last year, and learning just a ton from different regions, and kind of seeing change that's happening. And I think one thing that I get most excited about is meeting people like yourself, and knowing that we can connect all of us,
Yeah.
right? There are so many people that are hoping to see this change happen in our world, and how do we just get in the same place and work together and support one
Yeah.
another?
Yeah, that's really amazing. And I was saying earlier that I think like originally this residential care was just meant to be a temporary place, but over time we've made it like permanent. So when we talk of reunification, what are the objectives? Like, why reunification?
Yeah, I would say that we could talk about this probably for the entire day if we wanted
I
to.
know.
Um, I think what I've boiled this down for me of like, what is the hope in reunification? And I think so much of it is about children need to know who they are. And I think a big part of that identity and belonging comes from family. And so when we're talking about restoring relationships to family, it really is about healing. That's, healing what was separated. And I think that for a lot of children, if you experience time away from your family, there's almost like this hole in you that's like, wait, who am I and why am I here? And I saw this happen with super young kids at like 10, 11, 12 years old, asking me like, who am I? And I had to ask myself, like, why is this child asking themselves this? This is like, I never had to ask myself this. And I think it was because I got to look around at my mom and dad and be like, oh, this is who I am because I have a family that tells me so. And I think it's even harder for a foreigner to understand an African context, but the
Yeah.
idea of community is so much different in your context than it is mine. Like, the idea of family is so much bigger. There's like, and I used to joke, I was living with a Ghanaian, like one of my best friends, and she would always be like, my brother. And I'm like, wait, is he your brother or is he your cousin? And
Hmm.
he's like the same thing. And I'm like, is it though?
Yeah.
Like, we don't even see family the same. So I think part of it is like understanding that so much of our identity in these cultures, it does come from our family and our community. And if we don't have that, we start even asking who we are.
Mhm.
So I think from like a cultural perspective, there's also just so many differences that it's hard for foreigners to even understand. One story that I always share with people is like, I in Rwanda was known to have like very dirty shoes, and the children that I worked with were like upset with me. They're like, you need to keep your shoes clean. And there would be so many days where I'd be like, why does this matter?
Yeah. Yeah.
And this 12 or 13-year-old at some point goes, Amanda, people think that your dirty shoes are my dirty shoes. And it was this understanding like, oh my gosh, like our identity is so much even, it's broader here. Like, you
Yeah.
literally identify with being next to me and being together, and how I look matters to you. And I think that was kind of the start of me just even starting to understand, wow, okay, my culture is so much more individualistic than
Mm-hmm.
this. So it's
Mm-hmm.
even hard for me to understand fully, like,
Yeah.
but I'll clean my shoes now because I understand that this means something to you. So I think so much of reunification is like restoring that lost identity, and giving children really the opportunity to belong again. And I think this kind of segues into like some of, the steps and processes of reunification. And something that even came up yesterday with in talking to this Kenyan man who's trying to help churches understand the importance of reunification. And he said to me, we have 64 people groups in Kenya.
Mm.
And I had to just like sit back and be like, whoa,
Yeah.
64. And so if we're thinking about reunifying a child from one community that isn't part of that people group, if you're moving them across cultural like norms or boundaries, and they're speaking a different language altogether, like there are so many parts of reunification that we need to be super aware of.
Mm-hmm.
Are we even bringing children into other communities where they speak a different language? How will they belong if they don't speak the language? And so I think part of the reunification process is that family tie, like your biological family. It matters so much.
Mm.
And I would say that that's a theme that I've seen just like reiterated throughout the last year, whether it's in international adoption or foster care, whether we're talking about countries in South America, countries in Central America, wherever, there is a huge need for children to know where they come from. And I think part of that is the identity and the belonging. And I think until we have really the ability to heal and understand where we came from, it's so hard knowing a future. And I think the times that I saw things change for children were like, oh, this is where I'm from and this is who I am. And now I can like breathe again,
Mm.
Now I can like imagine the future. But it's almost like until I make sense of who I am and what I've been through, I can't even think of like what tomorrow looks like. So I think part of like the objectives for me of like just healing from history, starting to give children a hope for a future. I think a big part of that is just like ties to family and community.
Yeah. That that's really important because I feel like this whole unification thing, the earlier it's done, the better. Because if we allow the kids to live in the orphanage for, God knows how many years before, the bond gets broken at by then, and it becomes difficult to even reunite. So I think it's really important that we consider, this option. And I remember, I don't know if you were the one that said that to me, but someone was like, oh, even Rwanda that had genocide, they even, were able to cut off all orphanages, like no orphanages in Rwanda
Yes.
as we speak. Yeah, because they even, had pure orphans.
Yep.
So I believe that if Rwanda has been able to reunite all children to families, and probably maybe all other countries can do it. And some of the questions that come up that probably I would want us to touch on after you help us with the steps, the reunification steps. Number one, like, what if the family do not want their kids back? And all of those what ifs around it.
Yeah.
So just take us through the steps of reunifying kids into families. And for those watching, reunification is just like the return of children who have been placed in orphanages to their biological families after they've been placed there. So like reuniting them. So that is what reunification is all about. So Amanda, if you can take us through like the steps,
Yeah.
the various stages, yeah,
And I'll
of
I'll
reunification.
I'll preface this with, right now it is known that 80% of children living in institutional care worldwide have either one or more living relative.
Mm.
And so I think if we start from there and say, okay, 8 out of 10 children have someone they could technically go home to, like that is like a huge sigh of relief, because like we're not looking for foster families, we're not looking for adoptive families, we're actually just looking for someone who's already related to this child. So I
Mm,
think a big part of this is understanding the children in your care. Why are they there? And I have been just kind of blown away at how, I'll say, uninformed most people are of why children end up in care. And I think when we ask people to look at, okay, you have 30 children in your orphanage, where did they come from? People have a
mm,
genuinely hard time identifying where's the family, what was the reason, are they a true orphan? So I think it starts with understanding a child's situation. So we'll look at a child assessment. Where did they come from? Do we have links to the family? If we don't, we really need to start with family tracing. After we do family tracing, we figure out where this child came from. We start to look at the family, maybe the reasons for separation. So is it a single mother that has 6 children and she thought that this was just a way to, help her child? And I think a lot of the times it's people genuinely think that this is what's best for the child. And I think that's the hard part for me, of like, a donor thinks that they're doing the best thing by supporting this child in an orphanage. The mother thinks she's doing the best thing sending the child to the orphanage. Even the child in their head, I've heard kids say, I'm doing this for my family. And I want to say, you should never have to think like they're putting their family on their back almost, and they're like, well, I'll be the one that goes to the orphanage and gets a good education. But even feeling how much pressure that is for like a 14 or 15-year-old. And then there's almost this expectation that when they, finish school, they're going to provide for their family and their parents. And there's just a lot put on that child. So I think part of the reunification process is also looking at like, why did we get separated in the first place, and how do we help people understand like the reality? One of the things that I always had to talk to our case managers or caseworkers about was, when parents are afraid of children coming home, there's usually a reason.
yeah.
And it's about an emotion. Like they're afraid of paying, for more school fees. They're afraid of like less food at home. They're afraid of, like, there's some fear, and we just need to talk about it. And I think this, we're going to be able to talk about this later, but like that's part of continued support. It isn't, we send your child home and it's like, bye, have fun. No, we are going to bring your child home, and we are going to make a thorough plan to make sure that you feel supported as a parent and that this child feels
Mm,
supported. And you mentioned it earlier, like it depends how long, children have been separated. A big part of reunification is even making sure that this is a safe place again.
mm,
If they've been apart for too many years, we need supervised visits. We need phone calls that we're listening to what's said. We need temporary visits home, just, and then to have the child come back and say, what was it like being with, mom, now that there's a stepfather in the home? Or, you stayed with auntie for the first time, what was that like? So I think it's it's a long process. It's obviously very complex depending on what the child's experienced, what the family's been through. Um, Families also change. Like you have siblings that haven't been together for a while, and like if you're the oldest, what is it like to like go back into the family as the oldest, and maybe your younger brother has been the oldest for a while.
mm,
um, a lot of the boys that we worked with, they were going home to a new stepfather, and so a lot of it was like, how do we engage the stepfather? And the relationship would never be the same with them and a father. I think just culturally it's really, really challenging sometimes. But how do we make it the best situation we can
mm,
and ensure that when this boy goes home, he's not going to struggle with the stepfather as much as he would have maybe before?
mm,
So I would say, if we're going to break down like this into really simple steps, it's like understanding the child in your care, understand the family that you're trying to reunite them with, trying to understand the reasons why they're separated in the first place. And sometimes it could be like offering to work with a mother with a small business, or if there is a fear of like, the extra finances, it's okay. We will be with you in that. You know,
Mm.
you're selling tomatoes right now. Let's get you registered at the local market, and maybe we can increase what you're selling. And with that money, you'll actually have more, you know, freedom to care for your other kids.
Yeah.
And I think I, more than anything, would love to just see more organizations investing in parents. I think once you've seen reunification happening and seen a lot of support just going to one sibling, you can even see that there's division among the children. Like brothers and sisters, they do not get the same thing. You're going to have, you know, a hard time in a family. Like people are getting different services. So how instead of investing in one child for 20 years, can we actually take that same amount of money and put it in mom so that she can take care of 6 children or 7
Mm.
children? So I think even just in the reunification process, like looking at what is a smart investment into this family? Like, does it make sense to pay for school fees for 15 years? Probably not. But what if we invested in the mother in her business for 5 years, and that could pay off, you know, a lot faster, and actually have a lot greater impact? Because I think even from my experience, getting to see a parent provide for their child was like one of the most rewarding things I've ever been a part of. Like, it's great to see a kid with a good school performance or whatever,
Mm.
but to see a mother able to go and work, make money, and pay school fees for her kid, and like bring that school slip and be like, look at this, you know, there's so much, it's so much more dignifying
Yeah.
as a parent being able to do that. And I think that belief even in themselves restores hope in the family of like, yeah, we don't need an organization, we don't need whatever, like we are a strong family. And I would say that I've learned so much about just working with like parents and kind of mindsets. And I think a big part of it is letting them just see their strength again and like own their lives, really, like just helping them see that they can do it. And once they have had that like shift of like, I am a strong person that can be proactive in my life and I can solve problems and I can care for my children, I think that's like the long-term success in reunification for me. Is like, you don't need an organization. Like, we have worked, you know, to a place with you as a family where you are free to run. And I'll just say that part of that is less of a dependency model and it's more of a, we're in this together and it's a partnership. And so a big part of, you know, working with these families is sitting down,
Mm.
having very clear expectations, understanding who's doing what in the process. Like, it's not going to be like, our organization is going to do this, and this, and you just have to show up. No, it's like, what can you bring?
Mm-hmm.
What do you have? And what can we bring? And then we're going to make steps together. And one example I'll give is there was this boy, we were moving home to an area that just, I didn't feel like it was very safe. And so one of the grandparents like even commented on it, and I was like, okay, well, since we all know that this is a concern, how
Yeah.
can we work together to resolve it?
Mm-hmm.
And in the neighborhood there, it was pretty common that they had these like trees that you could grow, and then you could put concrete, and it created a gorgeous fence. And it was like everyone in the neighborhood was doing it. I'm like, okay, well, like, what would we need to make that happen? And they're like, this certain type of log or tree, and then cement. And I was like, okay, do you know where we can get the trees? And they're like, yes. And so I was like, can you be responsible to bring the trees? We'll bring the cement and like the metal tin. And it was like this shift in thinking of like, yeah, you're not going to give me everything. I do have something and I can contribute.
Yeah.
But like, to see that family even change how they're related to the organization, because it was like, you're not here to solve my problems, but you are here to work with
Mm-hmm.
me towards a goal.
Mm-hmm.
And you can like, and I think that's where the, it was the relationship that changed those families.
Mm.
Like, someone who is in your family, who cares about your child, who cares about your well-being. Not that you're going to give them everything. Like, it's like, here, I'm here to be with you, fighting for you, advocating for you. And I think, like, I just got to go and visit a handful of moms that I worked with for a number of years a few weeks ago. And I think to sit down with them and, like, one of them has this big screen TV in her house right now. And I'm going to be honest, I never saw that day happening, but I walked in there and I was like, is this your TV? You know, like, what is going on?
Yeah.
But she basically replied back, like, yeah, I'm a boss. Like, and I'm like, yeah, you are. But, like, that certain level of confidence where someone can then be like, yep, I can work hard and take care of my family and everything's going to be okay. But I think without the necessary relational support, resources, and opportunities, it's so hard to get there. But yeah, I think part of this is, like, those case plan meetings are so important. It's also so important to have, I would say, a specific person that's with each family, committed to the family. I think when we feel like someone is for us, there's an immediate sense of, like, trust built, and we're like, oh, I can tell this person things. And I think in some cultures, that's like, you want to hide your problems from people. You don't want, or I should say most cultures, almost all cultures, we're hiding our problems. So we can find someone that we can talk to and be like, hey, this is what's really happening. And someone that shows up when things are not going well, like, you're willing to jump in with that family when their pig gets stolen, and you're having to, like, brainstorm, how do we make sure the next pig doesn't get stolen. But I think it takes people who really care and you're committed, and it's hard. It's not easy. And, you know, development is like an up and down roller coaster, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And yeah, there's a lot of ups and downs. But I think when you've seen, like, true progress in children and families, like, once you've seen it's possible, that's what you just want to keep doing, because you're like, they can do this. It's just a matter of walking with people long enough till we get to that finish line.
Yeah. Wow, that's really deep. I want us to kind of make it more practical.
Yeah.
So, for instance, imagine, like, somebody who dreamt that I heard a voice telling him or her to start an orphanage. You know, with these people, and, you know, it's more of like cultural, spiritual dimension. Now, how do we get all of these people to know that, you know, housing these kids in these orphanages isn't the best idea, but reuniting them? Like, how do we even start a conversation with these people? Because people, they have that mindset. Once you are trying to give them another alternative, they believe that you are going against their God or their belief. You know what I mean? So how do we, from this approach or perspective, how do we preach the gospel of reunification to these ones? Because I know a lot of people started these orphanages either based on a dream they had, or an inspiration somewhere. You know?
No, totally. And I would say that this is, like, half of the battle that we actually end up facing, is changing people's minds. I think changing people's minds is the hardest thing. I think part of the issue with this specific issue is that for so long, the narrative has been orphans, 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 orphans. And so when we think of orphanage, it's like they don't have parents. And so until we can change even that small piece of this, I think it's so hard for people to understand, like, wait, so they have parents and they can go home. Like, how do we really get people to understand this and change how they're doing things? And, like, this is happening all over the world. Like, I last year kind of stumbled on this website, and it was a guy who his goal was to build 100 orphanages, and he was on, like, 21. And I was, like, scrolling through the site, and I wanted to just start crying. And I was like, he genuinely thinks that this is what is best. And that is the problem with so many parts of this, is, like, I think I said it before, like, the donor thinks that this is best, the church thinks that this is best, the mother who's sending her child to the orphanage thinks it's best. So how do we, you know, get accurate information out
Mm-hmm.
there, to get people informed. And I think a lot of this is like raising awareness, talking about advocacy, also talking about child development and looking at science. Like science actually shows children belong in families, and that's where they develop best. Like we need this small, you know, social knit of relationships to help us grow and develop. And in a lot of these orphanages, the children aren't even getting developmentally what they need by age or by stage for their brains to develop fully. So we could look at science, we could look at faith-based scripture that's
Mm-hmm.
like children, yeah, God is the father of all of us. Like he designed family. We're meant to know family. And there was someone I was talking to in Sierra Leone a few weeks ago, and he was the head of the orphanage, and he was basically saying, Amanda, I'm trying to teach children about the love of God. But one of these teenagers said, you know, Pastor, how do I know the love of God if I don't have a father?
Mm. Yeah.
And I was just like, let's just sit with that.
Yeah.
Why are you teaching me about the love of God when I don't even have the love of a father on earth?
Mm-hmm.
Like that was so, it was so directly linked for that child. Um, yeah, it's hard. I'm like
It's great.
storytelling even feels like not enough some days, because I'm like,
Yeah.
as an organization, that's one of the things that our communications and engagement team is super focused on, of like how, like, even when we do know the head knowledge, there's still some incentive, like, to want to support an orphanage, to want to support a children's home. Like, how do we get that head information to be hard information to actually change what we're doing?
Mm.
So without changing that mindset, we will not see people changing the way they give money or changing the way that they support children globally. So I don't know. If you have better ideas on how to actually change that, you're going to let me know, because we're
Yeah.
struggling.
So I think you've said it all, but I believe that with people coming from the faith-based approach, like, perspective that God asked me to do something like this, I think it's by scripture we can change their mindset, because there's this scripture is, I think, in Psalm 68, or if I'm not, yeah, that says that God placed the lonely in families. Okay.
Mm,
Yeah, he does that. He understands the importance of family. So in as much as God has asked you to help kids, that doesn't mean like starting an orphanage. It could be maybe supporting vulnerable families,
yeah.
so that they can take care of their kids, or probably a child loses the father, you support the child's mother. These are all ways NGOs and these founders of orphanages can look into, than just housing, because it's more expensive running an orphanage. It's very
Oh, yeah.
expensive, like providing 3 square meals a day, medicals, fees, it's really expensive. So channeling all of those resources into helping families, I think it's really the best. And one thing I feel like it will be more effective if governments, like people in top positions, are able to enforce policies, because already there are policies in existence. There are care reforms all over, even in most African countries. But it's just a matter of one leader saying that, hey, orphanages shouldn't be the thing for now. Like, it shouldn't be something we do. All kids should be reunited, because I grew up in one, but I had both parents alive, so I was like a social orphan.
Yeah.
But one thing these donors don't know is, when they come, these founders wouldn't explain, okay, this child is a social orphan, this child, they classify all of us as orphans. And the negatives in growing in orphanages supersedes the positives, if I'll put it that. Like, there are so many,
Yeah.
so many baggages,
Yeah.
so many of them. And one thing that even pushes me more to fight for the reunification is that once you turn 18 years, you are kicked out. You know, most of these orphanages don't have the resources to support you when you get to the adulthood years. They just leave you to navigate your life. The few that have can either support you through tertiary, if you're fortunate, and maybe will rent for you for a year or two, and then after, they just leave you. So it's really important that we look at the reunification bit and get all these children into families, whether it's their biological families, or any family structure, once it's a nurturing, it provides a nurturing environment, loving environment for the
Yeah.
child. Yeah, so that's what I would like to add to it. And I think 1 million home, we are doing really well, and we just need to keep on hitting the message. Advocacy can really be difficult. It may take longer than we all expect, because somebody doesn't understand, like, why are you saying we shouldn't, run orphanages? But these people don't know that most of these orphanages even rely on donations. Until these donors come, like, some the food quantity and everything just during those, it reduces. And the caregiver to child ratio, it's also another issue. Like, you get it. Sometimes one caregiver is taking care of like 20 or 30 kids, because the funds are not there to get one child to one caregiver. That's in most of the African countries. So it's high time we look at all of these, dots, and then connect them properly, and get these children into families. And one last thing I want to add is, in Africa, most African countries, when a relative dies, like, families come together, they contribute, and then have a befitting burial. But once they finish, they take the kids of that relative that passed into the orphanage. Like, and I was just thinking out loud, that if you've been able to raise funds for a funeral, why can't you also raise funds to take care of a child whose parents, passed,
Yeah.
than just dumping the child in the orphanage? You get it? Like, these are some realities, like, perception we all have to, have, and get to know that it's possible, it's doable. That if a child or your relative, your sister who passed has maybe two daughters, you can actually take care of them. It's doable than just going to dump them in the orphanage.
Mm.
Yes, in the orphanage, they'll get the food to eat, they'll get the books, the education they need, but emotionally, it's really difficult. There's so much for them. Family dysfunctionality is also another issue. Self-development. There's so much that goes on. So much that goes on. So I think, like, we just have to keep preaching the message, and hope that with time people will get to understand, the importance of reuniting kids, and not even starting orphanages at all. I've had people who reached out to me, oh, I want to start an orphanage, and I tell them, no, don't. It's just better you get this kids to stay with you. Like, if
Mm.
it's children you can take care of, just take them. Or if it's 3 or 4 families you can support every month with some money, just help them take care of their children, than, going to orphanages to do all of that. Then again, someone also asked, so what happens to the kids that are already there? Do we preach that people shouldn't go? That shouldn't be the case. Like, they also need help, I mean, as it stands now. But we all have to, fight towards a common goal, and that common goal is ensuring that orphanages are no more. Like, there's no more a thing. So if
Yeah.
God touches your heart to help kids, don't just go and start a structure somewhere and bring kids together to take care of. Rather, support vulnerable families that stands a chance of losing their kids into care or whatever. Help them, and that way we can make this society a better place for all. So that's just my 2 cents. We almost have like 6 minutes to round up. So if you feel like there is anything you would want to add, just add it, and then give your
Yeah.
final message.
I
Yeah.
would say just love so much of what you shared, and you kind of touched on at the end of like donors visiting, and I think part of this problem is the lack of education on the consequences that occur because of those short-term trips, because of a constant flow of people visiting. There creates a need for a child to be in a facility for someone to visit. So I think we can see it as we're visiting orphans and widows in their distress, but at the same time, if they are actually being pulled out of their family, out of community to meet the needs for a short-term visitor, like, this is so wrong.
Mhm.
So I think seeing the exploitation of children through children's homes, through orphanages, like, it's terrible. And I think starting to educate donors on, like, how do we make sure that this doesn't happen? How do we make sure that children do stay in family? And I think it's so much of what you said of we're going to invest our money in other ways. We're going to do it by supporting vulnerable families. We're going to do it by making sure that where there's potential for separation, we could actually step in and make sure it doesn't happen.
Exactly.
And we know why children are being separated. So I think it's a matter of like being systematic and strategic with even local leaders and communities and saying, hey, we know why children go to the streets. We know why children end up in orphanages. And I think just the last thing for me to end on would probably be what you touched on in terms of like after families lose a member and they're taking their child to the orphanage. I still think it's we are always trying to do what we think is best.
Mm-hmm.
And if what we think is best is actually not what is best, we're going to continue making bad decisions. So I have been just really, really passionate about parents and education and just like having them understand what a child away from their family means. And I think like if we can see that there's so much pain in separation, that it isn't just like the child's in pain. I have seen entire families missing a child, you know, and they're like so excited when the boy gets to come home. And I'm like, why are you guys living like this? And it's like, oh, we think that this boy's education is more important than all of us being together. And every time I'm going to say no. The attachment that you have in your family with your members of your family will always be more important than what education you're going to get. Like you can be the most educated person on earth at 40 years old and you're going to be like, but who's my mom and my dad and where am I from and where do I belong? And you know, like all those like higher self-actualization questions of like, who am I? Those are the ones that matter. Like we want to feel love and belonging. And I think the easiest, best way for children to find that is in their family, is in community, is in places of belonging, truly. And one more story that I'll give, I know I said that was gonna be my last, is there is a boy, he was moved home with his mom and dad. It was like right on the border of Rwanda and Uganda. And he, like his family had been in that area for decades. Like I think they knew the great grandparents of like the neighbors. So because he was so far out, I rarely got to see him. Our caseworkers would go and travel and see him, but I would just talk over the phone. So there's this one day where he's on the phone and he's like telling me about his family and the update, and he's like, everything's going so well. And I'm like, okay. And he's like, my mom just left to Uganda. And I'm like, what? Your mom just left to Uganda? You just said everything is okay. And he's like, well, you know, auntie's next door. And I'm like, auntie? You have an auntie? And he's like, no, like the neighbor.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, like what? But like this child, because his family had been in that village for so long, and that family right next door, like they had also been there for so long that to them that was family.
Yeah.
Their neighbors were family, like called them tontine, like that is auntie, to the extent that that was another story where I was like, okay, yeah, my mom and dad would never leave me with my neighbors in Chicago, Illinois. Like they would be arrested.
Yeah.
But like seeing how that is just such a different way of life in viewing community and family. And I think just seeing like social connections differently just based on stories like that of like, you know what, I think wherever we feel like that love and belonging, and like the family was like, yeah, we're gonna come back, obviously, like that's where our family is. But that those neighbors could also be seen as like that kinship care in similar ways to like our biological family. So I would just say that African cultures and communities have taught me so much about just like life and healthy relationships, and I don't know, things that I want to see our own, you know, US society adopt and bring back. Like I think the idea of family is one that we've even lost in the States. So like how do we learn from your close-knit communities and try to bring neighboring back?
Yeah. Yeah.
So much
Yeah.
to
Yeah. And one more thing is, this kind of orphanage thing, like Africa, we thrive on social bonds. Like we believe in communal stuff, like living together. Like it takes a village to raise a child, a whole village raising one child. But
Yeah.
I can say it just dates back to the post or pre-colonial era.
Yeah.
They coming in with these institutions, separation, individualistic,
Yeah.
and so now you can't even take care of your neighbor's child. You prefer taking the neighbor's child or your sister's child to an orphanage than taking care of that child as your own. But before then, it wasn't like that. But I believe we can still go back and adopt these old ways of living, like taking a whole village to raise up a child,
Yeah.
and not just copy anything like whatever this western. And one thing I say is this western countries brought up this orphanage, but now they've left it, like they've left it behind, you know in
Yeah, like
Canada.
we've said that this is
Yes.
not okay in our country, so we should also be doing the same all over the world. If we won't accept this for our children, we frankly should never accept this for another people's children as well. Like,
Mm-hmm. So it's like that. They have left it. They brought it, but they've left orphanages like it doesn't exist.
yes.
They are running, different home cares,
Yep.
foster care, whatever for their children, and we are still clinging. Like we are so attached to this orphanage thing, and have left or forgotten our values as Africans. So I believe it will just take more of education, sensitization, talking about this, so we get to know that orphanages isn't the best. Like, it's not the best way. It's not. I grew up in one, and it is not. It's not the best. Like, it's
No.
not the best way to nurture a child. And I say always that poverty should not be the reason a child will end up in the orphanage. It shouldn't be, because God in a way has a plan. Like, he has a plan B for all children, and that is his family. You get it? That
Yeah.
is family. And I just pray that yeah, people will get to understand our message
Mm-hmm.
and get to know that orphanage, quote unquote, it's not the way, it's not the ideal way
Yep.
of raising children. But we'll look at other ways. So if God has touched your heart to start an orphanage, no, don't. Rather support children, vulnerable families who stand a chance of losing their kids. Like, support them every month, paying their fees. This way we'll rather keep the kids closer to their families and
Mm-hmm.
then have their needs met. And that way is fulfilling. It's really fulfilling. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's all I have
Great
to say.
girl.
Do you
I'm
have
with
any
you.
final words? And then we'll round
My
up.
final words would just be I'm so grateful for who you are and
Yeah.
for what you're trying to do with your own life. Like, I know
Mm-hmm.
that there's so many, even children that I know, that they would benefit from a relationship with you and like just seeing where you are today. So
Yeah.
any way that I continue to like cheer you on and be your biggest fan, I'm just like so happy when I find people like yourself that we can advocate for change together. And
Yeah.
I know it's not easy,
Yeah.
but we have each
Right.
other and we're all headed the same way, and we just need to continue to pull in more people that are, interested in doing the right thing for kids and families. So
Mm-hmm. Mm.
it's not easy, but we're in it together.
Yeah, we are in it together. And final words from me. Thank you so much. I mean, everyone that joined us, your comments, your likes, everything means so much to us. But I mean, my final words would be to, like, churches. I think, like, the church is also one way we can sensitize people. So if you happen to be running a church or in a church and are a leader, instead of hear churches go like, okay, go to this orphanage, go and donate and your blessing will come. There's this mindset that, okay, the more I donate to the orphanage,
Mm,
the more my blessings will come, their prayers reaches God early, that kind of thing.
yeah.
I remember even back in the orphanage I grew up in, people will come with donations, but will come with prayer list attached to the donations. So they come to give, but they have a tall list that were in the orphanage, the kids would have to pray for, so that all of these mindsets has to
Oh,
change.
it does.
So if you're a pastor, if you're a leader in a church, just advocate for family-based alternatives for raising kids, instead of like pushing and advocating for orphanages. Because the more you tell your members go to the orphanage, the more, as a leader in your church, you capitalize on offer. People see it to be good, and then
Mm-hmm.
they go there, donate, and then expect that God will hear them. It's just, it's some way. But I believe with time all of us would change. So, Amanda, thank you so much for for your time. It was so great having you, and I know that this discussion wouldn't just end here. And to whoever that joined, you can be an advocate as well. I mean, by sharing stories that will, inspire people not to,
Yeah,
go the way of orphanages, but stick to family-based care alternatives. Yeah. So it was
yeah.
great having
Get
all
involved.
of you.
We're always looking for more people to join us in this. Obviously, no one or two or three people can do it. We really need just a movement of a ton of individuals, leaders, pastors, whoever you are. We need you. So this is, if you're on the call with whoever you seven are, we're inviting you in to join us in this work. So thank you all for listening. Deborah, thank you for having me. I look forward to continued conversations and work in the future.
Thank you too for your time.
Of course.
All right. Bye.
Bye.